I could never teach a screenwriting course because I don't really know what my own rules are. But I guess there's that thing where I think there's nice things that you can do. Where's that Robert McKee thing of like establishing theme in the first 5 minutes? I think there's a nice thing you can do where you can do that in visuals. I think in a lot of screenwriting books, there's always a lot of focus on dialogue, and people don't. As a director as well as a writer, I'm sort of trying as much as I can to tell the story visually as well. So I actually think the first image in Last Night in Soho is something that kind of ends up summing up the movie. It's like the whole film is about the difference between perception and reality. And the first thing you see is this silhouette shot of somebody in an amazing ball gown, and it looks like maybe like a shot from like a Hollywood 50s or 60s musical. And then when she switches the lights on, you see that she's just in a sort of mundane kind of like, corridor in her house wearing like a dress made out of newspaper. So in that sense of like sort of things not being like sort of perception versus reality, that straight away that's kind of you're setting things up.
Welcome to the show. That was part of my interview with Edgar Wright and Christy Wilson Carnes, the co-writers, of course, of Last Night in Soho, and Edgar Wright, as you know, which we'll be discussing in great detail tonight. To kind of get started, what were some of your takes on Soho? That's probably his latest film, and then we'll really dive into the beginning of some of these other works.
Yeah, it was definitely the work of someone who had a real big passion for like the Hitchcock movies of like the 60s, some of his later work, which I love personally. And I think he's British too as well. So I'm sure that's like a fundamental part of his film history and education and things that kind of inspired him. It got him into movies. But I think being an Edgar Wright fan, it didn't really feel like it fit in with his filmography. It felt like more of an homage, an Edgar Wright movie, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's definitely not like, I think, what was it called? Like the Ice Cream Trilogy or those famous, Simon Pegg films.
Yeah.
I think he always wanted to do a horror movie, and this was kind of his first way to do more of that. I mean, there's definitely some of the wit and things he's known for there. But it's definitely different to say the least. I mean, Edgar Wright's definitely known for like visual storytelling, genre blending, style and aesthetics, quirky humor, music as a storytelling device, and attention to detail. But of that, like, kind of list of what makes him him, I don't know, maybe 2 of 5 or so kind of hit on this one. But maybe we should start at the beginning, though, before we kind of get too far ahead. That is, of course, his latest work. But I want to go kind of in order. We probably won't hit everything, but we'll definitely want to hit those major films. Let's talk a little bit about Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah, that's one of those movies I remember like specifically when it came out on DVD. It's one of those things that me and my brother just kind of watched on repeat because it had like the solid aesthetic value of horror films that we had both kind of watched in secret as kids. One of those things like you're not supposed to see, so it makes you want to see it even more. But it had such a unique sense of humor too. You think about like Nick Frost and Simon Pegg, just how they approach things.
So, with this one, like we open in the Winchester. You do have a nice like button ending and beginning, so we can have the same place, right in the beginning, right at the end of it, kind of close the story off. It's like this odd kind of breakup where we find out his best friend's right next to him, her best friend, this couple's right next to her. That we kind of, that's kind of the slow camera movement, the way he writes and thinks about things. That's only like, it's like a 3-minute scene. There's kind of a 40-second title credit, and where we get to see more of the people just like slow moving, the traditional zombie stuff like that you think about when like, why do they go to the mall and Dawn of the Dead and some of that stuff, the commercial and consumerism. And then there's just like the actual monotony of his life and how kind of things go. And that's all really just like 5 minutes of this. We really get to know the main 5 or 6 characters. We see a few glimpses that people will see later. The store clerk becomes one of the first zombie, maybe the second zombie we see, because the first one's the guy at the door, I think. But what do you think about how he introduces these characters, what he's trying to accomplish here?
I think especially, this is obviously a visual format, the way that he reveals each character that's kind of included in the conversation with like a little pan to over the shoulder of the two people that once the scene begins, we assume this is a man and a woman having a conversation about a breakup at a bar, and like the amount of intimacy that we would expect out of that. And that's quickly subverted when we see that they're literally surrounded by the three people that are kind of causing the rifts in the relationship. So
Yeah.
I think thematically it kind of sets up like Shaun's journey. It's going to be what's really important to me, the friendship and the relationship, kind of how all that works, and just kind of how insignificant all this is, which we kind of get that on the tail end when we see like the people waiting to go to work, all just like checking their watches, literally doing those same monotonous tasks at the same time. Kind of just shows like how small our problems are and how we kind of get lulled to sleep by things that we consider maybe unimportant. But it takes something like a zombie apocalypse to kind of just reshape our perspective and maybe make us appreciate the things we do have. So.
Yeah, something I've definitely never related to it until you were kind of saying that. I think it's like Stephen Covey, the writer, talks about focusing on the important, not the urgent. We all focus on the urgent. That is life. That is what makes life a bit dull. But urgent is, of course, urgent. So it's hard to really know what's important. So he's kind of missing the relationship. He's even, I mean, he's taking the friendship for granted as well, which kind of plays out later. It's harder to be a bad friend than a bad boyfriend, maybe. But we do kind of see him all sorts of that. So in general, what we're going to hit on with some of these is like what needs to happen in the first like 5 to 10 pages, really the first 5 pages. You need to establish the world and the tone, you know, introduce the protagonist, present the inciting incident, establish the main conflict, set up the story's direction, and then engage the reader or audience through compelling writing. And the last one's a little kind of a bonus there, but establishing the world and tone, we're definitely getting the tone. It's definitely very stylized. The world itself, I mean, to this movie, and I would say the third film they did together at The World's End are about the world is kind of in that bar. The World's End maybe is more about a time in history as opposed to a place, but I think we definitely kind of see that. The inciting incident, maybe a little bit of both. I might be an argument is like, is it the breakup or is it the zombie apocalypse? But definitely kind of both of that. Maybe one's the incident, maybe one's the main conflict. You kind of, is either one of those feel like which is which?
Yeah, I feel like honestly, and we were trying to be like big brain thematic analysis here, that it's the apocalypse is just like the personification of the breakup to Shaun, you know, because it's unexpected. It's something he probably thought could happen, but never thought would. And then when it's in his face, he's kind of just scrambling to get things back to the way they were, which is what we would all, that's all the conflicts we expect to happen in any of these zombie, like The Walking Dead. The whole idea isn't necessarily just to combat what we have going on, but it's to get back to normal, get back to the sense of like civilization and relationships and things that matter to us. And again, just to reappreciate the things we all take for granted every day.
And you've already, your answer there kind of hit on like set up the story's direction. The only other maybe adding those together, the protagonist and direction, he's definitely, or this whole group is like the most unlikely people to survive this type of event. They're not prepared. They don't really seem to have any skill sets. And we're not seeing all of that right away, but it's definitely unraveling and becoming like more and more evident that this is not the right guy for the job. But that's what makes the movie so great, or especially like a comedy in this case.
Yeah, the comedy, which comedy writing is always tough, but I feel like as soon as you hear like Nick Frost speak in this movie, it definitely puts it on that trajectory, and it delivers, like you were saying, the tone pretty much in 3 lines of dialogue, which is it's impressive, and it's a great watch.
And it's odd because we were talking before, like I've seen this movie 100 times, and for some reason I was thinking the slow walk to the store, past the kid with a soccer ball, into the store, he pays for it, that we see later after things happen, he slips on the blood. I was thinking that happened within the first 4 or 5 minutes. I guess that's maybe close to like 7 to 10 minute mark after we see him at work for a little bit or coming home from work. But because that's almost like a little mini movie. And sometimes we'll see that if you can present that right away, which is so rare to do. I've been rewatching old Westerns as I always do. There's a movie called The Wild Bunch, which most people have seen. The very first scene of the movie, these little kids are basically feeding scorpions to fire ants. And that's kind of reflective of what's going to happen in that film. I think that's what's so unique about this is like once in a while you can say hey, here's exactly what's going to happen. Like famously, The Thing, they yell the whole plot of the movie, but it's another language. There's that scene towards the end of like Stranger Things where the kids reenact what you're about to see, but you don't know you're about to see it yet. I think those are all like kind of just hitting the subconscious. It's like so beautifully well done when you can do something like that.
Not so long ago, in the mysterious land of Toronto, Canada.
So Scott Pilgrim versus the World. This one, I don't know. This is adapted, right? Where does this kind of come from?
Yeah, I think this is based on I want to say manga, but it might be a manga. It's definitely like a graphic novel series. Definitely tipping its hat to its source material there. You can tell just by like the stylization of it. It's definitely influenced by the video game, anime culture, all the kind of stuff that blew up in the early 2000s.
22. You're dating a high school girl. Not bad, not bad.
Thank you.
I feel like just watching these two. So we've got an original and now like an adapted. He just puts you in the world. Like I feel so obligated to introduce you to the world or the setting or what their job is or whatever. He's just like, here's a situation. This 22-year-old kid's dating a 17-year-old. This is the band. This drummer chick's kind of snarky. This girl's weird about it. You know, the girlfriend's kind of odd or something unique. There's another kid who's just kind of a gamer. We're also labeling. Would you say that is similar to video games, or what do you think we're looking at with some of this stuff?
Yeah, it's definitely kind of going back to like those comic booky origins. If you think about like the way all the information is presented in a comic book is in a panel, which is literally just a square of information with an image and some text. So I feel like you were just saying, it doesn't bother trying to explain who these people are. You get it within 30 seconds of the movie starting, which is an incredible feat. And the tone obviously is there. If you listened, you might not know it with an untrained ear, but there's a lot of audio cues it's using there that are directly from video games. I think all those actually were from Legend of Zelda.
22. You're dating a high school girl.
From Super Nintendo back in the day. So me and my brother growing up, big gamers. He even more so than me, definitely was super into this movie. It's ironic, I guess, when you think about how British Shaun of the Dead was, and this is 6 years later, maybe. How like young American teenage boy this is. It's awesome. You can definitely tell he's a guy who appreciates some of the same things that these characters do and knows how to present those images to the audience.
And he's definitely got more of a budget here. I mean, this has got Chris Evans, we meet a little later, and some other big names in it at the time. I'm curious. I always think now, like maybe too intricately, like, do you have to buy the little Zelda sounds and stuff? Like, I imagine it depends how long it is or how many you're using, but it's a wild way to put some nostalgia in, you know, that's a little bit different. I think it works better in a comedy. Like there was a movie, James Vanderbilt wrote The Rundown, which is the old movie The Rock was in, and they kind of say, Beck, he's a specialist in XYZ. It's almost like a G.I. Joe type thing when they do it or something, but I don't know. It definitely works here. Like it's definitely part of his style. It's definitely introducing us to like, here's a few little nuggets of it's about to get pretty crazy. I think that's a good way to kind of ease into some of that stuff. And that's like almost more important than some of the other things we're seeing, but he is hitting those main things he needs to hit to kind of get this story going.
Yeah. I think if you think about, like we were trying to dissect, how do you establish kind of what the story is going to be in the first few minutes here? The tone obviously knocks out of the park almost immediately, but there's just like really one nugget of information here that I think that kind of feeds into what we're doing. And it's Scott's approach to relationships and women, which is essentially the entirety of the movie. Not to spoil anything, of course, but this was like a 13-year-old movie at this point. So, you get to kind of see like his casualness, how he doesn't really appreciate what's going on here. Kind of a similar theme like we were talking about with Shaun of the Dead there. It's, as we know, every time we get into like the auteur theory of directors, like that's the author of a piece. Think about a Stephen King book. Every one of his books probably has 2 or 3 identical pieces, you know, because that's just how we as writers present things. We put our own ideas and thoughts and things that are kind of deep and personal to us in our writing, even if it's just subconsciously. And it seems like just that relationship, men and women, is something that Edgar is really interested in kind of dissecting on screen.
It's kind of hard to show like naive characters too. You usually show flaws in a different way.
Yeah.
It's just more that he's just happy to be here. He's happy to be in the band and have this girlfriend, and everything's changed with some of this stuff. But just talking about like where are you at physically with this girl, and he hasn't even held her hand. So they're at least moving very slow or backwards, to kind of say where things are at.
And it's tough, like you were saying, with like a naive character, or maybe some people would call like a dumb character. It's hard to write them that way, honestly.
Yeah.
I know I kind of struggle with it because you want everybody to be Clark Kent or something. You want everybody to be Superman. So I think it's a skill to be able to write to a character non-judgmentally, which I think Edgar's obviously very good at.
So then there's Baby Driver. Here's a clip of Edgar actually describing how he wrote that opening scene.
Baby Driver, I guess the thing that happens in the opening scene, again, without dialogue, is that you as an audience see what he's like with these other criminals and what he's like when he's on his own with nobody watching. And it's like with them, he's like a professional and stoic and, and then without them, he's like a goofball. He's like a big kid. And that sort of establishes the tension for the rest of the movie is like, who is he really and who does he want to be,
So as he kind of mentions there, the big thing here is like the first minute or the first few seconds as we see the wheels roll up, the music's playing. We meet all kind of the tough guys, John Hamm, John Bernthal. He's acting in that persona there. So we see him at work versus him at play. Because once they go inside the bank to rob the bank, he's alone kind of with his own thoughts or his music. And he's very playful, and we don't find out about his trauma and things like that until later. Some of that kind of reminds me of like the opening of Drive. It's not just like, here's the world, here's the characters, here's the actor, here's the main protagonist and everything else, but here's what he does and why he's so good at it and how he got to be here to some degree.
Yeah, I think it's funny you mentioned Drive there. There was like a theory floating around the internet about this being a prequel to Drive. Like this would become the character that Ryan Gosling plays in that movie, which I think probably doesn't make any sense, but there's a nice little fun internet fan theory going around about that.
What else kind of stands out about this one? I mean, it's pretty concise. It's hard to think of a more concise way to make a chase movie.
Yeah, essentially this is no dialogue. This is presented pretty much with images and sound, which as we learned over the 2 hours of this movie, it's really all about the sounds. It's that iPod, the music that he's using kind of tells a story on its own. You get the feeling kind of, as we've seen, this is the third time we've looked at one of these characters, of kind of an immaturity, kind of a guy who's trying to be one thing, but kind of stuck in a stasis and trying to figure out what they want to be with their lives and what they want to do. And then that juxtaposition of him just like going ham, singing music in the car, and the violence going on in the bank there, and then how those clash, and he kind of just turns it on and becomes someone else. It's kind of telling for what this movie's about and who he's going to be. Definitely probably one of the best car movies we've seen since Drive. Nothing else is jumping out in the last few years. So these are hard to pull off, and when they're done well, they're great. They're memorable. They're all timers, and I think this is probably on that list for car chase movies.
He's definitely our youngest protagonist, I think, within Edgar Wright. Maybe until Soho, they're probably close to the same age. She might be a little bit younger, but It is interesting. He's kind of still thinking of characters that way. I feel like a lot of writer directors, if we're with them for 10, 15 years, their characters are going to kind of age up a bit. They start to kind of move along. Like I spoke with the writer director of a movie called Spinning Gold. He wrote this movie and he spent 10 years rewriting it, and his whole perspective changed because he went from being, a 20-year-old kid to a guy with his own kids. And that just kind of changed your whole perspective on characters and parents and kids and everything. So it's really interesting. Edgar Wright's still kind of focusing on younger protagonists, I think.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a fine line. You think about how quickly like culture changes and trends change, and how hard it is to write what an 18-year-old is into when you're, approaching your 40s, 50s. It definitely feels like these characters are kind of coming from his brain because they all have so many things in common. And I guess I feel like, I don't know him personally, but I feel like a lot of these traits that we've kind of dissected over these three protagonists are probably inherent in him. And being a filmmaker, being a writer director, he has access to probably that inner child more than the average person would. I don't want to say a lot of people get jaded in other careers, but he definitely gets to have fun at work, and you can tell he kind of puts that on film. So it kind of makes it entertaining, makes it fun to watch. That's his style. It's what he does.
So I'd formulated the story and I'd even pitched it to my producers like 10 years ago, to the point where, whilst I was doing other movies, I hired a researcher to sort of research aspects of the story. And then I really wanted to make it, but I hadn't started the screenplay yet. And the missing piece of the puzzle, I guess, was meeting Christy in 2016 when I was editing Baby Driver, that Sam Mendes had introduced us as, saying that we should be, Sam Mendes is our mutual friend, and said that we should get to know each other. And so, and then the first time I met Christy was in Soho itself, and sitting opposite one of the few strip clubs left in Soho, called Sunset Strip on Dean Street. And then Christy can take over this part of the story.
Yes, Edgar and I met in quite a nice private members club opposite the strip club, and I just happened to mention, oh, by the way, I used to live above that strip club. I lived in the top floor of Sunset Strip. Granted, my apartment wasn't a strip club, but it was very much in the building. And I worked in an Irish bar right around the corner from there as well. And I think you sort of recognized me as a fellow Soho person. And Edgar says, I have an idea set in Soho. Can I tell it to you? And I suppose it just needed the right setting. So we went on a night out, and we went to a few of like my old haunts, which were not the private members clubs, a bit dingy, kind of sad basement bars that were a bit dangerous and very good fun. And we ended up in the basement of this bar called Trisha's, which is literally on the same block as I'm on now, because we're both still in Soho. We never escaped Soho. But
I'm here right now as well.
we could have done it together, but we're 2 streets apart. But yeah, so we ended up in Trisha's, and Edgar told me the story that would become Last Night in Soho, and I wasn't on it as a collaborator. I was just as a fan and as a friend. And I remember being totally and utterly like entranced by it. And some of that was the gin and tonic, but I'd say 99% of it was the fact that it was just a story the likes of which I'd never heard before.
And that was Christy and Edgar again talking about Last Night in Soho. So this is the most recent film he's done. It's a little different, right? So I mean, it's of these, and we're not hitting everything he's ever done, of course. It's like we're really focusing on one character as opposed to kind of an ensemble, right? We're not showing you 4 or 5 people. I mean, Baby Driver was mainly about him, but we're like, there's other people in the car, and we're going to get to meet all of them. This one, we're really exploring a single character, what her life is, what she wants her life to be, possibly. That's kind of the theme, as Edgar kind of says in that short clip there.
Who are you wearing? Eloise T, of course.
This is the 3rd one in a row we watch where music is a big focus for these characters. It kind of guides them through whatever tasks they got going on. Scott is in a band. Obviously, Baby Driver is obsessed with his iPod, and she's into records. So it's kind of interesting to see how he uses 3 different mediums in a way to use music to kind of get these people to get their story started. Mm-hmm. But I think here with Ellie, the thing, like you said, that's unique about her introduction is the fact that she's such an isolated person, which we kind of see with what happens in the movie. We kind of begin to question maybe even her sanity at some point, because unlike the other characters, which we see their primary issues are in relation to other human beings, hers all seems to be internal. So yeah. I think internalizing that, literally keeping her in her bedroom for almost the entirety of this scene is very emblematic of the character and well written. So
and so this one is, perception versus reality, as he kind of said about that, especially we see here in the beginning. It is hard to say like what is going to kind of come next. I'll leave it kind of vague for those who hadn't seen it, just that there's someone in this reflection in the mirror. We see the record, we hear the record skip, we see the photo of possibly the grandmother or a family member. It's really just setting up something that feels a bit darker than the other stuff we've done. It doesn't feel, I'd say the other ones maybe feel like there's some small wins. Hers is maybe that her personality is great, but she may already be starting a little bit lower, a little bit more difficult, more hurdles to kind of jump through to get to this thing she wants to get to. So we've got establish the world and tone, introduce the protagonist, definitely some checks there. Present an inciting incident. The inciting incident, the main conflict, the direction of the story, they definitely feel more internal. And we're only looking at, about 3 minutes here, but they definitely feel like we're going to have to go in to get forward with this one. It's not going to, the plot itself unravels a bit differently than that, but I would say it's more important about the theme and what the character is kind of going through, as opposed to like what probably got the movie sold, which was the plot, maybe to some degree.
Yeah, this is not things you're going to find in a log line, but it's fundamental for getting someone to follow you on this journey. It's definitely the bait on the hook. If I'm not invested in a character, I mean, how many times do people start something on like, not to beat up on Netflix, but a streaming service where you have that ability to just back out if it doesn't have you in the first 5 minutes. So it's more important than ever to bait that hook just right.
I didn't set out to be a screenwriter. What sort of happened? I did want to be a director, and what sort of happened when we wrote Shaun of the Dead was that we did that not out of necessity. We wanted to make a film, and I guess we realized that nobody was going to write something for us, and we had to write it ourselves. The thing that we did, which I would urge anybody who's an aspiring writer to do, is not only read other screenplays, but I think even more importantly is watch movies and sort of break them down. Like I remember me and Simon, before writing Shaun of the Dead, we did that a lot, where we watched films that were sort of slightly relevant to what we were doing, or even sometimes just kind of classic films that we liked, and tried to sort of break them down into that. I mean, not to be kind of cynical about it in the sort of Sid Field sort of way of like the 3-act structure and all of those beats, but it is an interesting process when you do that, because you start to understand how things can work, and also how many different iterations of those kind of like twists and things that could be sort of in every sense. So that was a really interesting thing for me, and I don't often like have time to do that anymore, but I really enjoyed doing that, where you take one of your favorite films and try and dismantle it,
Yeah, I mean, I think reading screenplays is the best bet that you can really like get an education from. And I used to like to read screenplays for films I'd never seen, and then watch the film and see if it matched up to what my imagination was. And I learned a lot from that, in the sense of like, when then I started making short films, sometimes I'd write a short film and I'd give it to director, and it'd come back and I'd be like, wow, that's not what I wrote. And rather than go, they haven't directed it right, I would look at my short film script and I'd go, well, where did I go wrong? Like, how could I write this in a way that would make it undeniable that it should look like this? And yeah, so I think reading lots, and then I think doing it lots is really helpful. I mean, I wrote loads of short films in film school, and I learned more from that than I learned from just sitting writing, because it's like the actual practical application, and then seeing an edit and seeing something all the way through. And that's nice work if you can get it. I suppose that's handy if you're in a film school or something like that, where you have a pipeline. But if not, like I suggest, then even get your friends and block a scene that you've written, and like, put it up on its feet and have them speak the words and see how believable it is.